Welcome into the Thunder basketball universe. We are recording this episode on Wednesday, October 16th. That means the Thunder returned back from Denver for their fourth preseason game in the wee hours of this morning. So if me and Nick look and sound just a little bit tired, it's because we actually are. And so we had to bring in a nice reinforcement for us. Our good friend Royce Young, our beloved friend on the pregame and postgame show. Good to have you back,
Good to
Royce.
be here. Good to be on the podcast again. I'm ready to go. And I can't say that I'll bring the energy, but I'll attempt to be as lively as possible.
You got a fresh arm. You're going to throw some heat here.
Seriously, I'm ready to come in and out of the bullpen and show you what I got right here.
And warm it up. We appreciate it. And so the Thunder has now played 4 preseason games, only has 1 left. It's actually tomorrow on Thursday here inside of Paycom Center against the Atlanta Hawks. So we had to bring Royce in just to break down some of the things that we've seen so far this preseason. And boy, a lot has happened so far. It's been really fun to watch this group. And I know, Royce, you're just excited to see some Thunder basketball.
Yeah,
again.
absolutely. That's the thing is that you go through the summer phase. Nick, we were just talking that you have summer league, but then you do have this break. And you kind of settle into your off-season break. You kind of almost develop like a new life. Yeah. It's like, oh, okay, evenings are open. And then
you're making plans
I
again.
know, it was like, I'm normal. And then that first Thunder preseason game started, and it was like 2 or 3 minutes into it, and I was like, oh, yeah, I'm ready for this to be back. Not just because the Thunder are so fun to watch to play, but also just the routine and the normalcy to me is the NBA season. So I'm ready for my nights to be completely hogged by NBA basketball again.
Well, and you have such an amazing position within the organization where you really are around the team so much in some of the times where, eyes are just not on these guys. And you get to see what these guys are up to, the work that they put in, that sweat equity that we talk about. And so in a sense, the preseason is a little bit of a show of what these guys have done over the course of the summer, because each of these players are a little bit different, and it's just it's exciting to see kind of where they're building towards at the beginning of the regular season.
Yeah, training camp started back, what was it, September 27th or something like that. But I've been watching players in the practice facility at the Ion for quite a bit of time before that, basically playing a lot of pickup basketball with each other and looking sharp. And so that's been, that's an incredible treat to get to watch that. So yeah, I've been enjoying some Thunder basketball, at least in an informal setting for quite some time. And it's fun to watch them play. But like you said, Nick, so much of what, coming into training camp, it's a lot of fundamental stuff. And, Coach Mark has talked about that you really kind of strip it down and you go back to the basics in terms of the team structure. But for the players themselves, and we've seen some of this already playing out so far in preseason, it's about taking some of those things that they have worked on in the offseason, specifically individually, and then trying to kind of apply them in the team setting. And I think J-Dub talked about this, and it was really interesting, is that a lot of training camp is like, okay, I've worked on this thing that I've been doing, but does it work with the team? Does it work within the context of the group? And so you've kind of got to experiment and explore that. That's part of training camp preseason, but also going to be part of the early going in the season as well.
Yeah, he said you got to work on your game in the game. And that's something that is kind of underrated. He really noticed that about Shai in the Olympics, that's something that he could tell. Shai was kind of tinkering with his own game. Oh, by the way, while going after a medal in the Olympics.
I mean, that's the SGA mindset. Really, a lot of these guys is like, how can I get better in this with this opportunity? And so, I mean, that's kind of par for the course.
And even from the start of training camp to where this team is now, 4 games into the preseason, we have seen some strides being taken for the group as a whole. So it's really fun to watch that in real time. All right. We're going to do a little segment we like to call Shai That Again. And so a lot has been said throughout training camp. We've gotten a chance to talk to all the players, all of them, Coach Mark, Sam Presti. I mean, we've heard from so many people. And so we're going to do a little round of Shai That Again. And Royce, since you are our esteemed guest, I will let you go first with your
quote.
The
honors, right?
Yes, this is all you.
Take a guess on who said this one. Ben Franklin was a writer, publisher, and printing press.
Alex Caruso?
No, but that's a decent guess.
8th grade history professor.
I mean, honestly, there's a number of people that may have shocked you with them, but that was Sam Presti at his availability.
Ben Franklin was a writer, a publisher, and he was the printing press. So each one of those things amplified the other skill he had.
And if you're like, what does that mean? Which you might be wondering that.
What's the context?
The context of that, and I actually think it's pretty interesting, is that it was basically talking about the versatility of somebody like Benjamin Franklin, and that you had somebody that could kind of do everything. And when you think about that, applying that with within the context of the Thunder. There are so many players on this team, and a big goal of it also is to develop players that do everything.
Yeah.
And that's, it's been intentionally designed to have players that do that. There's not really specialists. Benjamin Franklin might have been kind of stereotyped to be the guy that, invented electricity,
right,
or whatever. But he did so many more things. And so he did it all within the context of what he did. And that's what so many Thunder players do. SGA is not just a scorer. He is a complete basketball player. J-Dub. Lou Dort is not just a defensive player. He's somebody, we saw it just last night in the game, that crossover and dunk. So all these players are so much more versatile and well-rounded than I think a lot of people give them credit for.
Yeah, to your point, last night in Denver, before the game, Michael Malone was asked about, not having a traditional point guard out there on the floor. And he said, well, whoever Shai's not guarding, bring it at the floor. And that's what an amazing thing to say about a guy that just came off a historic season that only Steph Curry and Michael Jordan have put together.
It just goes into the positionless style of basketball and the Thunder has done this ever since I've been here, at least, of just bringing in guys who could do a little bit of everything. I think of a young player like Dylan Jones, and you think of how you could roll him out there in so many different ways. He's already said he's played just about every position throughout training camp, and it's really fun to see Coach Dagnall try to tinker with these guys, be able to roll out a litany of lineups. I mean, I lost track completely of how many player combinations we've seen out there on the floor, but that's such an advantageous position for the Thunder to be in going into the regular season.
And one of the interesting things, and Sam talked about this too when he was talking kind of about the compounding nature of lineups, is that, that's going to be part of this early exploration process for Coach Mark and the staff, is that, you've added 2 kind of significant veteran players, but you've also got some young players that you want to work in and play as well. So it's about what combinations really compound with each other. Right. And, you can put Kaysen, Lou, and Alex Caruso out there, 3 ball hawk defenders, but do they compound well with Isaiah Hartenstein or Chet Holmgren, or them all together? So there's a lot of exploration there, but the interesting thing about it, to your point, Paris, is that you have a confidence that you're not sacrificing anything when you can put all these puzzle pieces out there together. Right. It's not like you're making a concession to say, well, we don't do this. You've got players on the floor that can do it all. So it gives the luxury of the coaching staff to really kind of lean into that exploration element of the roster.
And that's something Mark Daigneault said last night also about seeing that 2 big lineup of Chet and Isaiah Hartenstein together. He said, we kind of looked the same out there, and he meant that in a good way. Yeah. Stylistically, nothing really changed, despite the fact that they had 2 7-footers on the floor. Right. They were able to still play the same brand of basketball. It's a great way to kind of orient the team to have these guys that can do everything. Nobody gets played off the floor. Anybody can be out there on the floor at any time, depending on what the team needs in terms of specific skills.
And this Thunder team that again intentionally designed this way. And that's not to say that some players don't have strengths in some areas and some some deficiencies in others. I mean, of course, that's just the nature of sport is you're stronger in some areas and a little less in some others. But at the same time, when you think forward with this group, there's nobody, like you said, that you're hunting,
right?
Hunting on a switch. And I think somebody made the joke on Twitter pretty recently. It's it's a bad time to be the worst offensive player on the other team because you're going to have a really good defensive player on you.
It's so true.
If you're kind of the odd man out offensively on that other team, it's you've got a guy that's capable of all defense votes guarding.
Be ready.
Right now, so it's a bad time to be that.
Yeah, we did not have a Ben Franklin quote on our bingo card for this podcast today, so thank you for bringing that to the table today, Royce. All right, Nick, what's your share that again?
Mine is it is a barometer of intensity.
That sounds like Mark Daigneault.
No doubt about it. And that stemmed from last night when the Thunder racked up 15 steals, scored 38 points off of turnovers by the Nuggets. And, we've talked a lot about how over the last few years, the Thunder has been one of the best turnover differential teams in the NBA. They've been so disruptive defensively in terms of steals and blocks and deflections. None of that, though, is choreographed or hunted in terms of how the Thunder is orienting its defense. It's more of a byproduct of what Mark is talking about here, which is the intensity in which they've played the defense.
Right. The points off turnovers, the steals, all of those stats are symptoms of the greater cause here, which is everybody working cohesively on that end of the floor, making sure you're in the right position at the right time. It's the same thing with the, offensive fouls and the charges. That they're just not practicing charges. And they're not practicing, Lou going over screens and taking offensive fouls. It's no, they're making sure that these guys are in the right position to make sure that they're putting themselves in the right position to get those outcomes.
Yeah, like Nick said, this was a big theme from last year and just kind of the disruptive nature of the Thunder, but a lot of it is structural defensive disruptiveness. And so it's about kind of playing your spot. I mean, some of them are created just kind of on an instinctual play. I think of the one Alex Caruso had last night where it was just a simple like DHO and he just kind of stuck his hand in there, poked it away. I think we're going to see that a lot. That's Alex Caruso has an incredible knack for that type of thing. But, Cason Wallace does that sort of thing where he just kind of follows a DHO up and he'll pick the pocket. So like they're not gambling for these. They're not playing out of position and like sacrificing the integrity of the defense, like you said. But also, I think last night's game against the Nuggets is a great example of, obviously I don't think this is like you can expect 20, 25 point wins all the time, but like that's kind of, I think, the way that the Thunder are going to play a lot of games where they just kind of stay the course throughout the game, generate good, efficient offense, play their style, and then just trust the defense to just, make it difficult on the other team. And whether that's points off turnovers or that's just, good defensive show where you're getting stops and rebounds. But that's kind of the way the Thunder, I think, played a lot last season. I think you can look forward, like that's the way that they're going to play a lot this season as well. Yeah,
the Nuggets shot 60% in that first quarter last night, and I think the rest of the game, it was something around 35%. The Thunder's defense really settled in, and to y'all's point, like they were in the right position. Yeah. And then as a result, they were primed and ready to have those moment of truth opportunities. I think about Chet and Isaiah Hartenstein blocking shots at the rim and Lou Dort hustling over those screens to draw offensive fouls. Like those opportunities to make a play are only possible when they're in the correct spot in the shell. I'm gonna
do my Shai that again because it goes hand in hand with this one. You're not gonna be able to tell who said this just by the quote. There's no indication whatsoever. The quote is, "It's hard to score in practice." Period. That is it.
Could be anybody.
Could be literally anybody. That was J-Dub on, I believe, day 2 or 3 of training camp. An indication, of course, of the incredible defensive talent that is up and down this roster. But he was pointing to the fact that it's really hard to score in practice because of how great defenders we have on this team. But that only makes our offense better when you think about it, because we have to actually play the right way in order to score. Because on one team, you've got Alex Caruso, Cason Wallace, and Aaron Wiggins. And the other, you've got me and Shai and Lou Dort. And it's like nobody on that team do you want guarding you on any given possession.
There's nowhere to run.
Right. Around every turn, there is somebody there waiting to stop you. And so I love that balance is happening in training camp because it's really an iron sharpening iron situation.
That's the phrase I was thinking too, Harrison. It's a great point just about it. It also trains you just the other way offensively of like, you have to play the right way to break this down and score. Right. And it can't just be ISO heavy offense where you're just going one-on-one and trying to tee up on somebody right there. But, that's the way that, and kind of back to what you were talking about that first quarter against Denver, Nick, like one of the things defensively the Thunder did so well last season, which is unusual for a young team, is they don't overreact to, Strother knocked down a couple threes. They got a couple good looks. The Nuggets did. A couple of them were contested and they made shots. And so like you have to just continue to trust defensively what you're doing. And, as an offense that is hard to do to maintain that patience, to continue to just trust your stuff to try to break down the defense. But like you're saying, Paris, you get that kind of, you get those reps in training camp, which I think is a huge advantage.
And it really leans into something that Sam Presti said before the season, which is, there's a difference between moving the ball and passing the ball. And against these great defensive players that the Thunder has in practice, it might be tempting to just move the ball because it's a lot safer, it's easier. This is really testing the Thunder to make sure that they are passing the ball. And what that means is creating advantages for their teammates that they can actually do something with.
Moving the defense.
Yeah, players need time. That's what they need. They need time and space on the floor. Great passing provides that.
It's just an excellent point. And it's really been fun to watch, especially in that Denver game. If you tuned in, it was basically every other possession. It felt like the Thunder was getting a hand on the ball. Yeah. They were out in the passing lane. There was just so much disruption on that end of the floor. Obviously, numbers a little bit inflated. It's preseason, right? And so you have to take it with a grain of salt, but a really good indication of the way that the Thunder is tracking. Speaking of which, let's get into some of the major themes that we've seen so far here in the preseason and training camp. And Royce, I want to start with you because obviously want to get your perspective so far. 4 preseason games, as we mentioned, a lot of different lineups, a lot of different opponents that the Thunder's gone up against. I think of the game against the New Zealand Breakers, right? Just a vastly different opponent. The Thunder rolled out an entirely different, lot of players out there on the floor. So what's something that has stood out to you that you've been tracking throughout this preseason?
I think a lot of it is the combination of players and, kind of back to that point about compounding elements of the roster. It's been really interesting to watch just how different groups kind of pair and play with each other. I think, individually, SGA's jump shot looks so smooth, and you can clearly tell he has put a lot of time into a pull-up three this year. And it's just it's such an enjoyable thing just as a fan of basketball to watch one of the great players clearly come back, have identified something he wanted to get better at, and he's obviously better at it. I just marvel at guys like that are so driven to identify and find those sorts of things. But, J-Dub, I think, he's been encouraged to shoot more aggressively, and he's definitely taken that challenge on. And so that's been fun to watch there. But also, I mean, it has been really, really cool to watch 2 7-foot guys running dribble handoffs with each other. I mean, there was one last night where they inverted it against Denver, where it was Hartenstein on the other side of it. And so, that sort of interchangeability has been really cool to watch.
It's really thrilling to see Isaiah Hartenstein kind of dip his shoulder down and put the ball on the deck and turn the corner on people. I mean, to see him kind of hit the elbow and turn that corner and get downhill. It's like,
he did that against Aaron Gordon and the physicality of Hartenstein where he dropped that shoulder into him, bumped him off, and I think he drew a foul on the play, but that was really, I think that's an added element to this group that a young team didn't quite have, is that physicality to really kind of embrace the contact and go right into somebody. That was cool to see.
And Hartenstein had 7 free throw attempts in the first 9 minutes of that game last night in Denver. I talked to Mark Daigneault about it after the game of could this be a thing that, just given the way the Thunder spaces the floor, the physicality, and the ability for a guy like Isaiah to put the ball on the deck, he could potentially be a foul drawer throughout the course of the year. It's just fascinating because there's so many possibilities right now.
Yes. And that's the point of preseason, is to get a look at as much of that as possible. And I find it fascinating because this is not new for the Thunder. Coming into this season, this isn't the first time that the Thunder rolls out a bunch of different lineups. This is the same thing that happened last year and the year before that. It's like Coach Daigneault has been really establishing this as baseline for this group to just be ready for anything, be ready to be on the floor with anybody. And I asked Aaron Wiggins after, I believe, the Houston game here at home, I was like, at this point, does it even faze you guys, the amount of lineups and player combinations that Coach Daigneault rolls out any given game? He's like, not even a little bit. We're so used to it at this point, which is a really good indication that, expect the unexpected, and this group is ready for anything.
He gave you kind of a knowing chuckle.
Yeah, he was no. Not even a little bit. All right, Nick, what has caught your eye? What's one of the major themes you're sticking with?
It's kind of piggybacking off of what Royce was talking about here, in that this team has a lot of continuity coming back. There's a lot of returning players. We know that we've got, obviously, the rookies that have come in, and then the 2 veterans in Hartenstein and Caruso. But generally speaking, if you look around the NBA, quite a bit of continuity over the last handful of years. But so many of these guys are, 25, 26 or younger, that they have come back completely different players. Not only have they, done something different or are focused on something different, like Aaron Wiggins and Shai and J-Dub talking about taking more threes, but Cason Wallace is a different player. His skill set has improved. Chet Holmgren is a different player. His skill set has improved. So as much as the Thunder is trying to kind of incorporate everybody on the same page and integrate these new guys into the team, it's a bit of a moving target for Mark Daigneault and the coaching staff, because the players that they're trying to integrate them into are different than the ones that left the team at the end of the season. And so all of this has to be calibrated. I think it's a really good reminder for the fans as well that, hey, this team won 57 games last year. There's all sorts of outside noise about what the possibilities are for this season. There's nothing guaranteeing that these changed players are going to perform and get the results that they got last year. This is a never-ending kind of cycle that's going on here as they continue to morph and grow in their games.
Yeah.
It's been really fun to watch. It's kind of like, just like opening a gift on Christmas morning, because you're like, ooh, what's Cason Wallace bringing to the table this year? And it's like, oh, he's stronger. You can physically tell that he is stronger, more imposing out there on the floor, put on some weight, dishing out a few bumps as well. In the Denver game, very fun to watch defensively. You could tell his anticipation's a little bit sharper, I think, this year. But each of the guys, like you're mentioning, up and down the roster, there's something extra that they have added to their game. There's an element that is a little sharper, that's a little cleaner, a little bit more refined coming into this season. And I'm interested to hear from Coach Daigneault throughout the season just how that all works together, because training camp is as much about, finding what works for the team, but also learning your players as they come into this new season and making sure all that gels together as well.
It's a really interesting point by Nick, too. It's just, like you said, it's kind of a reminder, and it feels like coach speak to say it, but progress is not linear. And this is why it's not, is because the Thunder can be making progress, and in some ways it may the results and the outcomes may not be what you exactly. And look, it's a league about winning and losing. That's the point of sports. They keep score for a reason. But at the same time, it is a journey through the 82 games, and you want to be improving in a place when you start getting into March, April, and beyond, where you've really trained yourself for those types of situations. And a lot of times you have to go through some growing pains to kind of discover those sorts of things. So, as the season gets started, I think that is true, is that if you rewind back to the way the Thunder even, started last season with some really, really great wins on the road, that comeback against Cleveland, the Thunder were a much, much better team when it got to January and February. And so they were almost unrecognizable in some ways. I think back to the way, that opener against Chicago was kind of rough and rugged.
Yeah.
And the Thunder kind of, got through it. I think they ended up winning by
20, but it was a defensive
slugfest. It wasn't like,
yeah.
A sharp, clean, snappy game from the Thunder. That's just the way it's going to go. And, they got the outcome and the result in that game, but that may not be the case, as the season gets going. You've got to go through it.
And taking Chet as an example, they could roll Chet out as a pick and pop, spot up 3 guy at the beginning of the season, and it would look great and he'd be extremely efficient. But by the end of the season, if that's all that they've explored with Chet, then he might not reach the levels that he could possibly get to. So Sam Presti talked about in his beginning of season press conference that we might have to take some short-term losses to be able to have long-term victories.
Right.
And so exploring some aspects of Chet's game where he's putting the ball on the floor and attacking and playmaking and doing some of these things. And I'm just using him as an example.
Sure.
But these are things that there might be some growing pains with that. And that progress, as you're saying, might not be linear. But at the end of the season, that the ceiling of this team could be a lot higher than what
Absolutely.
it would be.
And I would even extrapolate that. I think a lot of people think of Isaiah Hartenstein and Alex Caruso as veteran players.
Yeah.
Alex Caruso is only 30 years old. But also these are guys that want to come in and improve and be coached as well. And I think there's often a misperception that these are plug and play things. You're taking them off of what it would be on NBA 2K and just adding, a couple 88 overalls into your roster or whatever. And therefore they account for this much. But these are players that are developing and improving. I mean, Hartenstein is a great example of that. He really kind of discovered his own game last season in New York as kind of such a well-rounded two-way player that he is. There's going to be elements now as he fits into the Thunder that are going to do the same thing. Caruso, he's a well-established defensive monster, but there's parts of his game that is going to develop and evolve and improve as well. He's not a finished product. Right. So I think keeping that in mind with all players across the board is important.
Just staying on this track of exploring players' games and just being open-minded. The thing that I've been tracking throughout all of preseason is the pull-up threes from Shai and J-Dub. And we knew that they were capable of this. I don't think anybody was ever shocked that they had this in their bag. But what came as a little bit of a eye-opener for me was that Coach Daigneault has encouraged both of those guys to shoot more of those things. And same thing kind of with Aaron Wiggins, for him to expand his volume a little bit more. And it starts with, all 3 of those guys have already established themselves as highly efficient players. I mean, you think of Aaron Wiggins, that guy shot 56% from the field last year and 50% from 3. Yes, he's a great candidate to shoot a little bit more. And he's a great decision maker as well. So you can trust him with more volume. But with Shai and Dub, those guys already establishing themselves as such strong driving threats throughout their entirety of their career, they add this element of their game that adds a little bit more gravity. Guys have to actually close out super hard to them now in the 3-point line. It just opens up the driving lane that much more. And I kind of saw this in real time, I feel in the Denver game. J-Dub knocked down those 2 back-to-back threes in the first quarter. And then second quarter, he's slicing and dicing the entire lane for, I felt 3 or 4 possessions straight. And so I really like what I've seen from these two, and that they're really hunting and looking for those opportunities, taking advantage of preseason to be able to kind of roll this out and the work they've put in on that.
I mean, that's just expanding the menu, right? When you're a great player and because look, so many, we hear it from, Thunder defenders all the time. Lou Dort talks about having a literal notebook on players. And so Cason Wallace talks about, taking mental notes on players and kind of understanding what they do. But every player is going to try to expand their own menu. Yeah. Thunder players aren't unique in this necessarily. Every good NBA player is going to try to be a little bit better. And so everybody understands what makes SGA such an incredibly difficult player to guard. Right. And everybody understands that with J-Dub. And especially, when you review back to the playoffs, teams really hone in on those things. And so the more you diversify your menu of options, the harder you are to guard. I mean, it's just, like a baseball pitcher, you got a 102 mile an hour heater. That's really, really tough to hit. When you can pair that with a great breaking ball, and then you pair it with a good changeup. And then if you add one more pitch, I mean, you just become more and more difficult to defend or hit.
To that point, real quick, because Michael Malone before the game was talking, he asked about, what the Thunder will do to challenge you guys throughout this game. And he was like, well, they drive the ball really, really well. So we have to protect the paint. We got to make sure that we're not giving them any easy driving lanes. And it's all about making sure that, SGA, Dub, these guys don't get downhill. And then the Thunder rips off 9 threes in the early going of that game. And it's that reputation, it opens up doors if you keep evolving and keep adding to the menu like you're talking about.
I'm so glad that you brought up the word reputation there, because I think that is going to be a fascinating subplot of the entire season as these guys like Aaron Wiggins and Shai and J-Dub potentially add more volume to their 3-point attempts. Teams are going to have this really difficult decision to make.
Yeah.
Do we hug up tighter on those guys? Do we go over the top of those screens if they're going to rip those shots from behind the 3-point line? Or do we hang back and let them take those shots? I think maybe what the Thunder is kind of contemplating is what does this look like if teams are completely hugged up to Aaron Wiggins because he's taking 5 threes a game or whatever the number is? And what kind of space does that create for us in an offensive set if that's the type of gravity that he's creating? And the same thing with Shai and J-Dub. Hey, if those guys are having a fight over those screens instead of ducking under them, what does the rest of our offense look like? Those decisions that opposing defenses are going to make could be a massive difference in how these games get played throughout the course of the season.
Just opens up so many looks and options out there on the floor. And it's been really fun to see the Thunder kind of tinker with those things throughout all of preseason. All right, before we wrap up, we got to let you know what's coming up next for the Thunder. I know we're all excited about this. Last preseason game here inside of Paycom Center. That is going to be at home against the Hawks, 7 p.m. Keep an eye out of all the things that we talked about here today. No doubt going to be a lot of lineups, a lot of player combinations, a lot of different looks for a lot of different guys as well. And then that sets the stage. Got a week off before our regular season opener at Denver. We're going to be back at Denver a week from Thursday.
And this really is a culmination of what the Thunder has tried to do all preseason. This schedule was set up pretty intentionally in that you had the 3 games in 4 nights. Then you have this nice little stretch to digest that, learn from it, 2 full practices where they could really get up and down, do a lot of 5-on-5 to work on what they learned from that 3 games and 4 night stretch, which will mimic a lot of times that we see that throughout the course of the season. And then you come back and you have this stretch of 2 games and 3 nights, which, I mean, that is a classic NBA schedule where you play every other night and you get the chance to see some of the main guys last night in Denver. You got a tough travel, and then you got to come back and turn around and play. This is really preparing this team for what a regular season schedule is going to look like.
Yeah, I'm really excited for that regular season opener at Denver. That game's going to be on TNT. We'll be there, keeping an eye out on everything, and of course, we've got you covered on the Thunder Basketball Universe podcast as well. Royce, thanks for joining us.
Great.
Man.
I can't believe it. It's once the 82 games start, they don't stop.
Yeah. I hope you're ready.
Let's get ready.
Buckle up. That's right. Well, thank you so much for watching and listening. Be sure to rate, and subscribe wherever you get your podcast. Thank you so much to our producer, Matt Bishop. And until next time, Thunder up and catch you later.